The Australian Financial Review.
In August last year, the US Mormon Church went on a spending spree in Australia. Within 6 months, the powerful and cashed-up Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints bought almost $500 million of Australian farmland. And it has agents looking for more large farms to buy. Typically, the purchase of large parcels of agricultural land is subject to the scrutiny of the government's Foreign Investment Review Board. But the Mormon Church didn't have to ask anyone for approval.
So when I first started looking into it, I was sure that they would have to get approval from the FIRB, and so I think was everyone else. But the surprising thing to me and to others was that there are no restraints on them.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. This week, senior writer Greg Bearup on why the Mormon Church is buying up vast tracts of Australian farmland and whether these acquisitions are in the national interest. It's Thursday, August 21. Hi, Greg. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
No worries, Liz.
The Mormon Church has been on an acquisition spree and is the talk of the town across Australia, especially in Mungindi, Forbes and Moree. How did you first hear about these deals and why did you decide to write about it?
So I first heard about it from a mate of mine out at Mungindi, who's a farmer out there, and he told me about the Mormon Church acquisition of this massive farm just north of Mungindi called Worrell Creek. It was $350 million. It's one of the biggest farms in the area and a big farm for Australia. There was concern in Mungindi about whether the Mormons would let their workers from this farm come to the Mungindi show.
There's a whisper coming in from the Oodnadatta track. It's all business out the front and party out the back. Yeah, the mullet's on the move and there's just one place to go. Bring your Murrumbidgee mudflap to the Mungindi show.
Come to the Cup, come to the races and go to the golf day.
And grab the lead. Better Tomorrow racing away. Better Tomorrow wins the Mungindi Cup at Beat Gobble. Third home Awesome Tycoon.
Okay.
And as my friend said, there's a lot of booze drunk at the mall and gambling at the Cup, and the Mormons aren't too keen on either. So I started looking into it after that first purchase in August last year, and what I discovered was that they'd bought 3 other very big farms in New South Wales over 6 months, taking the total number to almost $500 million. These were massive farms, so people that I spoke to said that of all the big farming operations that were sold in Australia at that time, they were virtually all of them.
These were the big ones.
These were the big ones, yeah. And then I found out later on that they were looking to buy more farms. So I wanted to find out a bit about the Mormon Church and why it was buying up all this agricultural land in Australia.
And what did you find out, Greg? Why is the Mormon Church buying up agricultural land, not just here, but also around the world?
So the Mormons are a kind of distinctly American religion. They began in Salt Lake City in Utah, where they're now based. But in recent years, they've spread beyond America. They've got 16 million members around the world. They're growing in Mexico and in South America. They've got a big emphasis on baptising new members. You will have seen, people knocking on your doors. And they go around the world trying to convert people.
Hi, how are you doing today? We're missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
It's the only global religion that was been invented in the past 200 years. And in some ways, it's more business-friendly than the older religions.
And that's important in the context of what we're talking about.
It is. So the president of the church and its 12 members at the top are like a board of a multinational company. And then below that, they have many hundreds of thousands of volunteers who prop up the church's fortunes with free labour. And so the church itself runs itself on tithes.
We regard the tithing funds as sacred money, the Lord's purse.
Mm-hmm. So it takes in about $6 or $7 billion a year from its members, for 10% of their earnings.
And we want to be very careful about how we spend it.
And that runs the church, and it has a surplus, and that surplus goes into investment funds, which just keeps accumulating. So no one really knows how much money it has, but there's a website called The Widow's Mite, and it tracks the church's finances, and it estimates that its investment fund has grown to more than $200 billion, and that it's growing at such an astronomical rate that by 2040, it will have reached $1 trillion, which is the size of a medium-sized country's GDP. And so a lot of that money has been invested in property. They're one of the biggest private investors in the US, and they own more property in Florida than Disney does. They even outbid Bill Gates for a farm in 2019 in eastern Washington. This bidding war went on for weeks, and the Mormons outbid Bill, so they've got a lot of cash.
And Greg, there has been scrutiny of the church overseas over time. The church has been criticised for being secretive about its finances and for aggressively trying to minimise tax and accumulate wealth. Tell us about the case of the hidden billions in the US.
It's very interesting. So this follows on from an investigation by the Washington Post. And what happened was that the church had this hidden fund called Ensign Peak. And they divided the fund up into all these various shell companies to hide that investment and the size of that investment from US authorities. The US Securities and Exchange Commission did an investigation finding that they'd hidden this money. The reason, according to whistleblowers, that Ensign Peak, this investment fund, was trying to hide these funds was twofold. One, they didn't want to lose their charity status in the US. And the second one was that it was a bit embarrassing for the church that asks its members to give 10% of their wages, each wage bill, that has all this money. So they were trying to hide that not only from authorities but also from their own members. Mm-hmm. They got a $5 million slap on the wrist, and there were a lot of people in America who were annoyed about that. So the church said that it regretted that mistakes were made, but it's a pattern of behaviour with this organisation.
And Greg, there has also been controversy in Australia.
Yes. So in 2022, an investigation by The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald looked into a scheme set up by the church here.
It's alleged the Mormon books are actually being cooked in a massive tax dodge. It's money Australia could well use.
Tithings in Australia are not tax deductible, and what the church did was they got their members to put their tithings through a church charity, which allowed them to claim back that money as a tax deduction. The Age investigation found that some $400 million was put through this system and shouldn't have been claimed.
It appears to be a giant sham. And this is a sham not by ordinary Mormons, but by the church in Salt Lake City.
As part of this investigation, there were things raised about one of the trust funds that the church operated.
According to its accounts, it's one of the biggest charities in Australia. It takes in more donations than Oxfam, more than Beyond Blue, more than Caritas, the Catholic Church's international aid agency. Yet it has no public presence in Australia.
And it was highly suspicious because what happened was that in that 1 year, the 60,000 Mormons in Australia gave a combined total of $93 million a year to that trust. However, compared to the rest of the world, the church's 16 million members outside Australia only gave 25 million.
It makes no sense that Australians are so disproportionately generous compared to Mormons in the rest of the world. It just didn't add up.
So, Greg, this latest buying spree is not the first time the Mormon Church has been a landholder in Australia. They bought a property in 1997 and sold out over 10 years ago now. You spoke to people who were involved with that earlier deal. What did they say about it?
So the property we're talking about here was around a place called Coober Station, which is down at Griffith. And you're right, they paid $70 million for it in 1997, which was a lot of money back then. And I tracked down an accountant who used to work at this farm. He was saying that what happened at the farm was that they were making heaps of money, but that each year a 9% internal interest charge would arrive from America, from the church in Utah in America. And that effectively wiped out any profit that they were making. So it meant that they didn't pay any company tax in the whole time that they owned that particular farm. It was bought in the name of a company called Ag Reserves, but it was controlled by the church in the US. He also said that there was a rotation of free labour. Mormons are supposed to do missionary work, and they would get retired farmers and tradesmen and whatever to come out and work on the farm, which gave them a huge advantage over rival farms because labour, particularly at harvest time, is extremely hard to get. So having 4 married couples there over the harvest is
quite helpful.
Is a godsend, you might say.
There you go.
So when I asked this accountant what the purpose of the farm was in the church's greater scheme of things, he said the members in Australia would have thought it was for the return of Christ and to have somewhere for the saints to go. But he said the message they were getting on the ground was, how much money can we make out of this farm? So I put this to the Mormons, and they said that for their recent purchases, they wouldn't be using internal loans and that they wouldn't be using missionary workers on the farms. They said that the farms that they had acquired would be run as commercial enterprises and will be taxed accordingly. They also told me that when they sold the farm in 2014 for $120 million, they'd given the money to an Australian charity. But when I asked which charity and how much, they wouldn't tell me. So the surprising thing to me and to others was that there are no restraints on them. Australia signed a free trade agreement with the US in 2004, and it means that a US entity like the Mormons can buy any farming venture in Australia up to $1.4 billion. And that's not a cumulative total, so that's virtually any farming venture in Australia. And they don't need to get approval from the Foreign Investment Review Board or from the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. So they sold out years ago, but they've come back with a vengeance.
We're talking about the Mormon Church and its purchase of $500 million worth of agricultural land in Australia since August last year. Greg, as you've said, these purchases did not require any government approvals because of the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. Explain why that's unusual and why some people, including the Nationals, are up in arms about this.
So when I first started looking into it, I was sure that they would have to get approval from the FIRB. And so I think was everyone else. Anyone else apart from people from New Zealand or Chile or America, $15 million is the limit, and that's a cumulative limit.
So after $15 million, you need approval.
You need approval. So when I discovered that it was $1.4 billion, I was kind of shocked. And how it came about was that in 2004, Mark Vaile, who was then the Federal Trade Minister and soon to be leader of the Nationals, negotiated a free trade agreement with the United States. And it had this deal in it, which meant that US farmers or US people wanting to buy Australian farmland or Australians wanting to buy US farmland had these incredibly generous provisions. And that was indexed, which meant that the Foreign Investment Review Board and Jim Chalmers didn't have to sign off on it. So the Mormon Church, through its various entities, can buy as much agricultural land in Australia, as long as each farming enterprise costs less than $1.4 billion. So when I put this to David Littleproud, the Nationals leader, I think he was quite shocked with it. I don't think that anyone in government or the Treasurer's office really knew that this provision was in there. It was kind of this thing that hadn't come up before. And so Littleproud is now calling for a review of those provisions in the Free Trade Agreement. And farmer organisations and farmers too are up in arms.
This week it's been reported that in the past year an investment arm of the Mormon Church has spent almost $500 million on farmland in New South Wales and Queensland.
Colin Beatles, who's the CEO of Grain Producers Australia, he just said it's not in the national interest to have a foreign entity being able to buy as much land as this.
Without attracting any scrutiny whatsoever from the Foreign Investment Review Board.
Because they're also looking for more land to buy, and this might not be the end. Colin wants it to go to some parliamentary committees for review, and I think Littleproud would as well. I spoke to Jim Chalmers' office, but I think they didn't want to comment because of the tricky nature of US negotiations at the moment with Trump. I don't think they wanted any kind of bombs going off on the outside. So it seems that the government is a bit gun-shy on this issue because of what's happening in the US at the moment with Trump.
And Greg, as part of your reporting, you spoke at length with Adelaide barrister Neville Rocco, who's a former Mormon and, like David Littleproud, believes that FIRB and Treasury should be looking into these purchases. What did Neville have to say?
So Neville was an interesting guy. He became a Mormon in his early 20s when he met his wife and she was a Mormon, and he had held senior roles in the church. He's an eminent barrister from Adelaide. He'd represented the church at international forums, and he was a bishop in the organisation.
I'm a former member of the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My wife and I became disaffected with the church around 2017.
And then a few years ago, his wife became ill with cancer, and they spent months in isolation. And during this time, they started looking at some of the issues that have been raised about the church, both ecclesiastical and financial.
We eventually left the church formally. We had our names removed from their roles. In the end, we just couldn't be associated with the type of what we saw as corporate greed that was going on.
And so they had months and months to do this. And as they were doing this, they kind of uncovered all this stuff from America and elsewhere about the financial misdeeds of the church.
From the SEC prosecutions that have occurred over the last years, it's clear that what they were doing was not appropriate, was not legal, and there was no reason for a church to break the law in order to fulfill what it should be doing, which is helping the poor and needy and getting its message out to those that need to hear it.
And there was a particular incident where they built this massive mall in Utah using the money from tithings.
Then when we started seeing them getting involved in malls and buildings and farms and shooting ranges.
And Neville's wife said to him, "Is this all true? Is this?" And he said, "It's all true. It's all true."
She asked me, "Is that true that they're doing that?" I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "Don't pay another cent. That's it. We're out." And that was it.
And they'd been paying tithings all their life. He paid a lot in tithings. He was a very successful barrister. And so
the average farmer has to make a go of it in the ordinary commercial world.
He does think that FIRB and the Treasurer should be looking into this. He says that they have enormous advantages over everyone else.
They have the ability to say, look, we can cut prices, we can do what we need to do, because we don't need to make the profit, because we're not like an ordinary corporation. We've got a backer that underwrites us in virtually anything we do. That's not like the average farmer.
Firstly, they get their money tax-free in America. They're using this tax-free America money to compete with Australian farmers for farmland.
But when somebody is coming in with donated money that they've got from overseas, and they throw that donated money around liberally to purchase properties and put other people out of the market, both as purchasers and vendors, to put them out of the market without explaining why they're doing it. Of course there are going to be questions, of course there's going to be disquiet, and of course, even if it's not legally wrong, it just feels morally and ethically disquieting.
He says that the money could also be used for the greater good.
If $100 billion were injected by way of charitable work back into either a country's or a world economy, how much good could that do? How much alleviation of suffering, of hunger, homelessness, need for medical attention and the like could that do, as opposed to just gathering interest and growing in size and sitting there idle in the United States?
But yeah, he does have good things to say about the church, and he's very thankful that the church brought him and his wife Penny together.
We're just best friends. We spend a lot of time together and we love it, absolutely love it. And so if They should get some credit for that, I guess.
And he says that there's some really great people in the church.
There are genuinely good Christian people in that church, but they are powerless to work against this corporate juggernaut that puts them under so much pressure to do things that don't come naturally, even to their native Christianity.
So, a final question, Greg. What's been the response to the story? Do you think the Mormon Church will continue to buy up Australian farmland, and should it be allowed to without requiring government approval?
So it's had a big response, particularly from the bush. I've had phone calls from farmers saying, what's happening. Little Proud is looking into this matter at the moment as we speak. And Colin Beatles, as I said before, wants this referred to parliamentary committees to see if we need to have an amendment to the US Free Trade Agreement. And so there are people who support the church buying land in Australia, saying that these big aggregations of farmland often can only get foreign buyers. And some people say that the Mormons are involved in food production around the world, and it could bring value adding to Australian farm produce. So there's two sides to that story. So is it a good thing for Australian farmers and Australia's national interests? Well, other people have got a $15 million limit, and they can buy billions of dollars worth of farmland without any scrutiny. The church has a history of skirting the regulations, of pushing the envelope when it comes to all those sorts of things. And so I think that they should be put under a bit of scrutiny. It should be looked at by the Foreign Investment Review Board. It should be looked at by Jim Chalmers, because they have the finances to radically change the face of Australian farming.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with Financial Review senior writer Greg Bearup joining the podcast today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow and Mandy Coolin. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and consider rating and reviewing us, as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.